I say, Amen. Amen, amen.
I want to share a thought about the Torah portion this week, which is called, what's it called? Kitavo.
Brene Brown.
Brene Brown. Brene Brown has this great drash on the Torah portion this week called Kitavo with Glennon Doyle. And in Kitavo, we have all of these different pieces, and something that I think really stands out for me, at least now, and how I'm thinking about Judaism and Jewish community really so much differently than when I was first ordained as a rabbi 20 years ago. And it has to do with the narrative. I'll start by saying that I don't feel like growing up I had a family narrative, like this is our family's story. Our family's narrative was, let's just get through this. That was most of my family's narrative. But I know, even as a kid, my childhood narrative was a Jewish one. It was, there's been really hard times and we've gotten through it. And it's not always going to be so easy, but we're going to get through it. And that has been a really powerful narrative. A narrative of being enslaved, a narrative of being exiled, a narrative of being hurt and wounded, a narrative that there are pharaohs out in the world, but I was always able to kind of move through, and I really connected with all of that, even as a young child. And that narrative is reflected in this Torah portion. So, along with those little booklets, there was a handout that says Kitavo source sheet. And it starts off with a little section from Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, for those that are following online, chapter 26, starting at verse 5. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I wanted to do a few things. I wanted to share with you a core narrative of the Jewish people. And I wanted to show you a little bit about how we play in Torah study on Saturday mornings. This is what it's going to be. And by the way, this is the interactive section of our service tonight, right? This isn't just rabbi talk, you doze. This is a part where we might share a little bit with one another. So I'm going to limit myself to being in this area because we still have folks that are following along online. Otherwise, I would do like the Donahue thing. Some of you don't know who Donahue is. I've got no way to explain that. So just go with it. In any case, in this core narrative, it says in Deuteronomy, imagine this. They've gotten to the border. They've traveled through the desert. It's been more than 40 years. They're at the border ready to go in. All they have to do is cross through this river. And Moses, at the end of the Torah, in this second telling in the book of Deuteronomy, is sharing some important things, highlights of all the stuff we've learned before with some new stuff. This is a new one. And Moses is saying, is going to share a message from God and says, you shall then recite as follows before the eternal your God. So basically what's happening here is, they got into the land and they grew some crops. And when they start off with these new batch of avocados, they're going to have to say these words. They have to say, my father was a fugitive Aramean. My father was a fugitive. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. And there it became a people. We grew there. Verse 6, the Egyptians, though, they dealt harshly because they were threatened. They didn't trust in this growing population within their country. And so they dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. That's the slavery part of our narrative. Verse 7, we cried. God heard and saw our plight, our misery, and the oppression that we were experiencing. And then God freed us from Egypt with a mighty hand by an outstretched arm, awesome power, and with really cool tricks. Verse 9, after we got out of Egypt, God brought us to this incredible land that God gave us. Remember, they're hearing about this, but they're not in it yet. They're at the border, they're ready to go in, but they're learning about these rules before they even step foot in the land of Israel. And when you go there and you grow your new avocados, you might think that after 400 years of slavery and 40 years of schlepping through the desert, that they would get to make some really great avocado toast, but that's not what happens. Instead, first they have to bring the first fruits of the soil which you, O Eternal, have given me. They have to say this quote, this declaration. They have to speak it out loud, and then they're going to give it to the priests. You would think they finally got into their land and they're hungry, and they grew these crops. They were ready to eat, but no. They had to make a declaration, express their gratitude, and give it to the priest. That's the text that they had to say. So part of the narrative of when you grow food and you have the first of your crops, you have to remember where you came from. My ancestors came from the Bronx. You have to remember where you came from. You have to know how hard it was. You have to share it. You have to help us remember that we were liberated and brought out after God heard our cries. And then we get to a land. And then we give thanks and gratitude. Those are all the components of our narrative. The rabbis who come much later after this declaration, the rabbis are going to say, look where it says the Mishnah Sota. The Mishnah is rabbinic writings of the 200s of the Common Era in the land of Israel. They write, you have to say this in Hebrew. They actually say in Belashon HaKodesh, in the sacred tongue. That's Hebrew. In the section before this, they say, here's the things that you can say in Aramaic. They spoke Aramaic like we speak English. But some things had to be done in Hebrew, and here it is in Hebrew. The Mishnah and the rabbis say, you have to do it in Hebrew. But what happens if they're not speaking Hebrew, they're speaking Aramaic? What happens if they don't know the words of that whole declaration? Somebody's going to be left out. Somebody is going to feel inhibited, embarrassed, something, because maybe they can't read. So in another section of the Mishnah, where it says Bikurim, that's what this whole thing was talking about. Bikurim is the legal principle of bringing these first fruits from the harvest. It says, originally, all who knew how to recite would recite. It's so Jewish. Originally, all who knew how to recite would recite, while those who did not know how to recite, others would read it for them. And what's not in the text, but our commentator is explaining it, somebody would say the words and he would do repeat after me. So if I didn't know how to read the words, I didn't have to memorize it. Like Lecha Dodi tonight. Shh. Like Lecha Dodi tonight. Holly loves the repeat after me moments. You didn't know that that was a traditional part of, being inclusive in Jewish life. So they would say the words and people would say it back to them. But when they refrained from bringing, they decreed that they should read the words to both those who could and those who could not recite, so that they could not repeat after them. What's that mean? This is the interactive part. Look at that last part. Why does everybody have to do this recitation? I say it, and you repeat after me. Sarah, is that you? Okay. Oh, you're blocking the sun. You're not raising your hand? Okay, fine. Who has a thought? Why does everybody have to read the narrative out loud in Hebrew, but now everybody's going to play repeat after me? Lauren, you have a thought? Okay. One idea is let's preserve the sacred language of Hebrew. It's really important, and drum it into them so they never forget. That's definitely my mom's experience of elementary school. All of the things that she had to memorize and recite. And she could still, well, not now, but she was able to say all of these things after, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. She'd recite these things. Yes, Sylvie.
I think it's saying how when you repeat after you, like someone, it makes it a communal experience. Like it's more than just individually everyone says this prayer. It's us as a people says this like passage prayer.
So Sylvie says when everybody says this passage prayer thing, it's communal. It's not individual. Everybody participates. I love that. You can have your bat mitzvah this weekend. One more. Yeah, go ahead. A sense of equality. A sense of equality, equity. We're not leaving anybody out. If everybody has to play repeat after me, then nobody knows who can read and who can't. It's now hidden. It's gone. We're all just people in the tent. We're all, no matter where we are, online or on land, just more folks who are in the pews. Our narrative, I'd like to suggest to you, is that we have to know our history as memory, not just as history, in order to know who we are. Am I still in? Sorry, Andrew. We have to know where we came from and our people's experiences in order to make a meaningful journey forward. And part of our experience of being enslaved means that we need to always know that there are some people in the community who don't know how to read. Or whatever it might be that will make them feel a little different. And our job is to make sure that they know that nobody's blood is redder. That their tuchus in the seat, can you say that at services? It just did. Theirs is no different than anybody else's. No jokes. That we get to be one people, one community. The folks that want to journey with this Jewish community, share the narrative, tell the narrative, know where we came from, so where we can go will be clear to all of us, and that we don't leave anybody behind. That we don't make the bar too high, that people feel on the outs. Wouldn't that be nice if we can structure Jewish community that way, our neighborhoods that way, the city of Boulder that way, the county, the country, the world, where we can enjoy the privileges we have, but make sure that nobody who's feeling wounded or outside, that they will know that they are supported and that they get to sit right next to us. כן יהי רצון